Welcome to the Chase MedSearch podcast, the place where we dive deep into the medical device sales industry by discussing the current trends, timeless philosophies, and amazing experiences that shape our niche of the industry. Join me, Jordan Chase, on a guided tour as I speak with established sales leaders and professionals as they share stories that will help you get in, stay in, and thrive in your medical device sales career. Let's start the show. Welcome back to the Chase MedSearch podcast. I am super excited to have our guest, Jon Alwinson, on today for several reasons. One, he's a very accomplished guy. I always love talking to top performers. He's written a book, which is exceptional, and I have worked my way through it diligently. It's just, there's so many nuggets in here, so much rich and useful information that I want to do a two-part series with Jon. I already texted him that and told him that this is just too good to have just one podcast recording. And I see this book and Jon himself as a resource for a lot of conversations that I have in the normal course of my work with people that are in medical device sales and are looking to sharpen their game, for folks that want to get into medical device sales and break through, that are in sales. They might be in business-to-business sales right now, or folks that just graduated from college. I think there's lots of audiences that could benefit from the wisdom in this book, and I'm just excited to have Jon on. Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Jordan, it's an honor to be with you, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I am so glad you reached out via LinkedIn and said, hey, Jordan, I've got a book.
I know. Well, you've always been a guy deeply respected for a long time. And so I wanted to get your opinion on it. And honestly, it's written from a medical device guy. And so, I figured your market, your listeners would benefit greatly from the book. And I'm excited to talk to you about it today.
Yeah, there are so many things in here. And I didn't realize we had so much in common, and we're gonna dive into that, as we go through this, because there are some stories that had me laughing out loud. They're just so relatable, and I love the humility in the book. And I know that's a topic you touch on, where you're just completely unafraid to share when you've messed up, when something didn't go right, when something didn't go as planned. And I think that in reading a book by someone who's so successful, it kind of lets the pressure out of the room, the air out of the room, so to speak. And you realize you're dealing with a regular person who has disciplined himself, is highly motivated, obviously bright, but has channeled a lot of that energy and passion and enthusiasm into success. But along the way, there's been some points where you tripped up. Yeah. And I think that really helps people when you share stuff like that.
For sure. I mean, I'm an open book, and we'll find out throughout this call and in our discussion, but I'm happy to go anywhere you want with this. And I feel like the more transparent and open you are as a salesperson and leader, the more people ultimately respect that. You can't hide anything from anybody, I feel like. Right. And so you might as well be open and honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Salespeople are almost an impossible audience to hide anything from, because they're so well trained in reading people. Right?
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
So anyways, let's kick it off. Formative years, I always love to dive a little into people's backgrounds, their makeup, where they came from. Your dad was a pastor.
Yep.
How did you know you wanted to do sales?
I kind of, it's funny. A lot of people say they fall into it. My dad wasn't a business guy at all. Still isn't a business guy. He's a pastor. He's a communicator, and he's also an author, but didn't know much about business. And so I would say through the church, through my dad's church, the one thing he was able to do is that he'd tell me, hey, Johnny, I don't know anything about business or this guy, but I know he's a successful sales guy or entrepreneur. Why don't you go try to grab coffee with him? And if you can set it up, I'll pay for it. And so what he taught me and what he gave me was a group of mentors, unbeknownst to me, that really helped get me into sales ultimately. And so I'd say I kind of fell into it, but it was more through mentors kind of guiding me in my strengths. Yeah,
that's outstanding. And you got some advice early on from a rather unlikely mentor to think about medical device sales. How did they even know to steer you that direction? How did they even know that a lot of people don't even know medical device sales exists as a career possibility?
I know. It's one of the best kept secrets, by the way. So this guy was an elder in my dad's church, super successful businessman. He was actually a investor. He sold his organization for multiple millions. I mean, just did really well off that. And he invested into a couple medical device startups. And so as I sat down with my mentor, Jon, for coffee, he was like, get into medical, get into capital. And it started my career off with a large Fortune 500 company, and it was really the best move I could make. But he kind of analyzed my strengths, saw my weaknesses, and said, I really think you should go medical device sales, which was kind of new to me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, just great advice right away. But medical devices obviously wasn't your first career or your first career move, because it's hard to get in there just right out of college or as an extremely young person just starting out.
Mm-hmm.
What was your first sales job?
So out of college, my older brother, Joel, and I started a company called ARCS. It was an outdoor footwear company. And we started manufacturing shoes in China, sandals, boat shoes. I was at the University of Florida at the time. And so we had a big group of friends, and we kind of launched it through our network. But we gave this thing a run where we thought we were going to be entrepreneurs like, Gary Vee and all these big names out there. We thought we were going to be the next big thing. And for about 5+ years, we were cutting our teeth trying to build this organization. And I talk about it in the book, but made every mistake in the book being a young guy and really not being taught traditionally in sales either. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was calling on these purchasers for these large outdoor footwear companies. And it was really a time of life where I was what I call getting kicked in the teeth.
Yeah.
It was a good formidable years, but we made all the mistakes and ended up shutting down the organization after about 5.5 years.
Okay. So put all your sweat equity into it, energy, effort, passion, enthusiasm, and it failed.
Yeah.
What was that like for you, having kind of your first entrepreneurial venture just not work out?
It was tough because on top of, working, call it 7 to 5, I was working at a gym one night a week, and every other night was a gym. And I was also working at a high-end restaurant. And so for me, I was going all out at that point in time. And so it was really kind of like getting punched in the stomach as hard as you can. And I was getting married the next year with my wife, Sandra. And I was at a point in my life where probably my lowest I've been, where I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And it was a disconcerting time. And honestly, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, because I feel like post-college, in those few years post-college, your candidates that are talking to you, Jordan, they're not really sure what they want to do and don't really have a good idea yet. And it was an experience that I'll never forget, but really it was the adversity I needed to start my career off on a good start.
What was next for you after kind of realizing this was up and you weren't going to be in business with your brother? I'm in business with my brother. This is just an ongoing theme with us, Jon.
That's amazing.
And we've been in business together for 7 or 8 years now.
Yeah.
But this wasn't going to work out for you guys to work together. What was next for you?
Yeah. So what was next was I did sit down with my mentors, and Jon, I cite in the book, Chapter 1 Mentors, he was the guy that pointed me in medical device direction. I saw these guys walking around with scrubs on. I knew a guy from J&J, and I said, what do you do? And, they always looked like they were successful individuals. And so between my mentors and people I knew, medical device was where I decided I want to put my focus. And so reached out. I think, Jordan, that was when you and I first got to know each other as well, where I had reached out to you and a handful of others and found my way in the industry eventually.
What was that first job for you?
So it was an associate for a big Fortune 500 company selling computer-assisted surgery. Yeah. And it was really eye-opening. There was so much adversity. So I went from, call it 5.5 years with the startup, to another 2.5 years of being kind of the grunt in medical device, where I wasn't paid a salary that most medical device people get paid. I was an associate salary. And with the carrot being dangled in front of you that if you do X, Y, Z, we'll move you along to this spot. And it was formidable. It was more adversity, which has kind of led in who I am today. But It wasn't easy, but looking back, I'm grateful, really grateful for the experience.
Yeah, and that's kind of an ongoing theme in the book too, is working through adversity. A lot of these topics are interrelated.
Mhm.
They're not just isolated, they're interrelated, many of them. And I want to circle back real quick to something you said. Because when I do this podcast, I kind of listen with multiple ears of the audience. And I'm thinking about young people that don't know what they want to do yet, like you said.
Yeah.
And I know you're a believer in personality assessments and personality tests. I just took one the other day, and I've been in business for a long, long time, and it was extremely insightful
Hmm.
about me. Things that I had no idea. And I actually brought the person that represents that assessment on the podcast, and we talked about her work. But you're a big believer in these assessments. Tell our audience kind of why you are,
Yeah.
why you think about those.
Yeah, I think the more you know about yourself, the better off you are, right? The more you understand yourself. And so I love the Strength Finders test. I love these other examinations where they give you your top 5 talents.
Mm-hmm.
What it does is it helps you understand those uncertainty feelings, like anything and everything you go through, regardless of industry. The more you know yourself, you can kind of pick up on cues,
Mm-hmm.
weaknesses, strengths, and ultimately we want to try to minimize our weaknesses a little bit, but mainly we want to double down on our strengths.
Yeah.
And I think that is where success lies. Be aware of your weaknesses, minimize them, and double, triple down on your strengths because that's where your power is.
Yeah. It's just such a great point. I have worked with a lot of sales VPs in my career, and I remember one guy that everybody just loved. This guy, man of integrity, courage, boldness, all of that. And he would build an incredible team around himself. And I'd say, sort of, Steve, what are you doing here? What's your idea with hiring this person to be, so close to you? They're not anything like you. And he said, Jordan, I got to surround myself with people smarter than me.
Yes.
And he wasn't necessarily saying intellectually smarter. I figured that out later on, but they had strengths he didn't have.
Hmm.
And once he knew himself so well, because he'd been through a battery of assessments, he knew what he didn't have, and he knew what he wanted to focus on.
Hmm.
And I think the earlier you get that in your career, the better off you are.
Agree. I could not agree more. Spot on.
So you're in your medical device job. You're working super hard.
Yeah.
I bet I know who that was with. And certain types of companies will tell you, we're going to hire you as an associate because this person's getting ready to retire.
Hmm.
But I will tell you, having watched it for 25 years, that person never retires because why would they? They
Right.
got you.
Right.
Now you're doing all the stuff they don't want to do
Right.
and working weekends and nights and holidays and birthdays. And, if it's a trauma job, you're working all that too.
Yep.
And it's just never going to happen unless that person magically decides to retire. Most of the time, once they have a few associates, they don't need to.
Right.
So at what point did you realize that this was probably not a terminal place in your career?
Yeah, so it was about 2.5 years of working with him. About after year one, got off to a little bit of rocky start with my original manager. I went from selling shoes to selling neurosurgery, right? There could not be a bigger learning curve.
Yep.
And I remember before I even moved up to Atlanta from Orlando, I had a conversation with the manager at the time, and he wasn't happy with my learning curve. It was like 2 weeks, and
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't quite comfortable with the patient interaction piece where I was interacting with the patients. And he and I had a conversation where he may or may not have said something along the lines of like, "Hey man, just so you know, as easy it was to hire you, it's just easy to fire you."
Wow.
And I
Mm.
I kind of did a side turn, like, you just hired me literally 2 weeks ago, and I'm taking my wife and my new life up to Atlanta from Orlando, and that's what you're going to lead with.
Mm.
And so for me, I knew kind of early on that this probably wasn't the place I would stay forever, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it was more adversity on top of adversity. And so we worked through it, ended up having a cordial to good relationship. But I don't think I was ever going to fully trust someone who says something along those lines to me.
Never.
But I learned so much in the role. I just developed like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we had a fine relationship. It smoothed out. But this guy came to me in my church and was like, "Hey man, just so you know, there's this amazing little company in Atlanta. My older brother is a director of sales over there. You should really check it out." And call it for about a year, they were courting me after a year in with this previous company. And
Mm-hmm.
it could not have been a bigger risk, but it was the best risk I ever made in my career. And it's got me to where I am today, which I'm extremely grateful.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting about that, and I think I am pulling this from various parts of your book, is in placing people the way I do, I find that one thing that sales managers really want,
Hmm.
and whatever they can do to get it, they get it, is a 360 view on who they're going to hire. And it's an unlikely source, right? Someone at your church had observed you, had watched you, had a family member that was going to have a position. And you got hired. Granted, you were already in the medical device space, but
Hmm.
they had a chance to observationally see you in another setting and your character, integrity, kind of person you are. All these intangible characteristics. This is what sales managers, and I hope people are hearing me on this. This is what they want. You have to be this person off the job too. In many, many, many cases, I am always asked by lots of clients questions that have nothing to do with the interview process
Hmm.
or the candidate's skill set.
Right.
They all oftentimes want to know, what else do you know about this person? And I think that that's another thing in your book that as I was reading, I was thinking about how often managers, irrespective of what their background is or where they come from, they're all kind of asking the same question is, I'm going to trust my paycheck,
Yeah.
my family's sort of survival, if you will, or our ability to maintain our lifestyle. I'm placing a bet on someone. And I need more than just what I see on a piece of paper
100%.
to know about that person.
The character, all those different attributes that you talk about. I mean, are they going to fit in well with my team? But ultimately, do they bring, like you talked about earlier in the call, is do they bring a skill set that can elevate this territory to new heights and complement mine, and or is it what the territory needs? Sometimes bringing in a different style to a territory is really
Mm-hmm.
important as well. So yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah. I think that chapter on identity nailed it too. You made the point to live from your identity, not for your identity. That sounds like a very subtle distinction. And I know what you mean by it, but what did you mean by it?
Yeah, so I guess the context around that too is we went from failed footwear company to adversity for 2.5 years as an associate to when I finally had my chance to be a full on territory manager. I just went gangbusters, as you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine. I had all this pent up like desire to prove myself. And so I went, and year one was rookie of the year, was top four. And then year two was in contention for founders, which was the best 2 years combined for this medical device company, and was going just bananas in the territory. And my dad, as all loving fathers do, was pulled me aside and was like, "Hey man, like I love that you're having success, love that you're killing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you want to win that founders award more than anything, but man, just realize this." He's like, "You're my son, you're Alwinson, and you're God's kid." He's like, "If you don't get it, it's not the end of the world. Like your identity is not getting this founders award.
Mm-hmm.
Your identity is being God's kid. So, dude, go hunt excellence, be great, but live from your identity, not for your identity. Your identity in Christ is already set." And for me, I was like, whoa, it was game changing, and it's been life changing advice that I try to remind myself. So as I think of your listeners out there, there may be one or two or more people going through that just need to hear, be yourself, live from your identity. It's all going to work out. And that's some of the best advice I could give anybody.
Yeah. I like how it's positioned in your book. I think it's like the first or second chapter because it's foundational, right? And I tell people all the time, who want to be in medical sales, but they've never sold anything. I say, we're going to build a house. What's the most important aspect of that?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
some of them get it, but some of them say the windows, the,
Mm-hmm.
the framing. I'm like, guys, we got to start with the foundation. And I think that's true in life, right? You're talking about this being a source of strength for you, living out of an identity that is within versus seeking affirmation and self-worth
Right.
from whatever award other people can bestow on you. And we all know reps that have had doctors die, have strokes, move out of territory, and this is their biggest doctor, and they're staring down the barrel of a gun, so to speak. And they're not going to probably, unless there's a miracle afoot, they're not going to hit P Club, and they're not going to have or be able to replicate some past success. And so then what do they do with their self-worth and their identity and things like that? And I think you're talking about a supercharged source of strength right there that no one can touch.
It's at the end of the day, when we all look back at our life, we're not going to remember the P clubs and these different things. That's great. And it provides for our family and it's a blessing. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is eternity, not to get overly preachy here, but we're not going to look back at our life and when we're on our deathbed and say, man, I wish I won more P clubs or I wish I would have done this or that for work. Right. And how we lived our lives. Did we take care of our families and our kids and all that. Right. And so the most important thing, in my opinion, is God. And so that's why I start with him as the foundation. I try not to, I think it's really well done in the book where it's not too much in your face, but it's there and it's important for all our lives.
I love it. There's a friend of mine who would not be on this vibe or this wavelength with us at all on any of this stuff, but bright guy, great friend. He's retired now. I've had him on the podcast and he sent me a cartoon once, and it was from the New Yorker, I believe, of a family gathered around the bed of a man who's obviously dying, and he's an older man. And the caption was, I want you all to know that I was the #1 Midwest sales leader. And for 1972 or something like that. And it was just ironic. And I laughed out loud and called him because some of this stuff that we're talking about is that cartoon encapsulates so much of it. And this guy's on his deathbed. But anyway, you're an extremely busy person. You're a leader. You've always been a leader, but now you're leading people that you actually directly manage.
Yeah.
Most of my audience on this podcast is extremely busy. How did you ever find the time to write a book?
That's so funny. So in the morning, really getting a hold of my morning routine was the game changer for me. It was years of a little bit of work. So wake up, 5 a.m., coffee, get in the word a little bit, read some business books as well. And then what would happen to me is probably about 6:15 in the morning, thoughts would come to my mind where I would go in front of the computer and just jot down my thoughts. And so for me, as a people leader too, I'm going on my 8th year of leading others. And each year I try to refine, like, what do I believe about sales? Like, how can I teach what I've learned in my success that I've had? How can I make my team better? And so this book is the book I wish I had 15 years ago, where I just took a few minutes every morning, and sometimes I wrote for 15 minutes and sometimes I wrote for 30, but for call it, 4 years, just kind of jotted my thoughts down on paper.
Love it. Jon, I got to take a quick pause. I got a brisket that I got to pull out of the oven, and I'll be right back. Give me 1 minute. Okay.
Sounds good.
Jon, I'm so sorry about that, but I'm back.
Thought we were going on commercial break. I love it.
I got up at 3 a.m. this morning, lit the pit.
Hey, when brisket calls, we got to take care of that.
And it's going to relate to our whole conversation here, and I'll tie it all in. But lit the pit, got it on there, smoked it till about 6:30, and then I cheated and put it in the oven. And it's wrapped in towels and resting in a cooler now. And the reason is because our daughter's team made the Final Four for basketball in Waco.
Wow.
And so they're playing for a state title. First game's Thursday. If they win, they play for the championship on Friday.
Wow.
So she finished the regular season #2 in the nation for made threes.
That's awesome.
Out of every school, in public or private in the country.
Holy cow.
And yeah, so for the sophomore class of 2026.
That's so cool, Jordan. Congrats.
Thank you.
Tell her keep on keeping, man, and go get that championship.
Yeah. You're a basketball guy, which is another common theme with us, Jon. And I loved seeing some of the analogies in here about you were a shooter, which both my kids are, my son and daughter. And you have this saying, take a bad shot, clear.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that, because there's a rhythm in sales there.
Yeah. So growing up, I was obsessed with basketball. I mean, I'd be 2-ball dribbling in the morning, call it 6 a.m. before school, to the point where the neighbors would knock on my front door and complain. And my mom and dad would say, too bad, like the kid likes basketball, we're letting him play, And so I would practice my game in the morning. I practiced all afternoon after school. I loved basketball and loved it so much that in games, I would be almost too serious. And those nights that I had a little bit of a rough start or shot an air ball or missed a bad shot, I had to figure out quickly a way to shake it off and move on. And so the two things that I came up with at that time, the internet really wasn't big, But I heard the saying, think of a sheet of paper, like a clear white piece of paper, visualize that and just say clear when you make a bad shot.
Yeah.
And for me, it was what I needed. So I would either say clear or next play. And I think I kind of alternated between those two things where, it's translated nice into sales. When I make a bad call, there's a story in the book I talk about that I had a nurse manager literally laugh at me on a sales call that I made. And honestly, I would have laughed at myself. And I did laugh after the call. But
we've all had them.
After the embarrassment set in a little bit, I just had to say, hey, next play, clear, move on.
We have all had them for sure.
Yes.
And that's a great attitude. I love the next play attitude. And that's why sports, I think, are so key. I mean, not everybody will play sports. Not every kid maybe should play sports. Both my son and daughter have. And I see it showing up, the goodness of it, in lots of different ways in their lives, because they do have, you got to be resilient and you got to keep coming back. And there's going to be ups and downs. So no, that's
100%.
That's awesome. Another thing that I just loved in your book was you talk about sales process. Now, sales process is a thing that I harp on a lot because the toughest hiring manager I ever worked with from a recruiting standpoint, he was huge on this, and he was a tough guy, and he's a great guy. He's just a hard-nosed guy. He was fair and he knew what he wanted. And he developed me. I think sometimes really good people that are experts in their craft develop us, recruiters for them, even because they teach us so much about how they think. And he was a monster on sales process, and you had to have it down. And he did not care what it was, but he cared that you had one.
Yes.
So talk to us about that, because I always tell people you got to have one. And I also tell them, the young ones, hey, nobody in medical device really teaches anybody how to sell. They expect you to show up knowing how to do that.
Yeah.
But I think you might have gotten taught in medical device. So tell us how you learned sales process. Who taught it to you? Where'd you get it from?
Yeah. So I think that first organization that I was with as an associate is where it really took off. And, I got to see how a big Fortune 500 company did corporate training. And, I went from selling shoes to high-end medical devices and capital. And so quickly I knew there were some gaps in my game. I knew I had the interpersonal skills. I knew I had the drive and motivation, but how do I put it all together? And, I became a student of the game, started reading books like Little Red Book of Selling by Jeffrey Gitomer, New Sales Simplified by Mike Weinberg, things like that. And went to an event with this organization where they taught sales process. And that's where I met Todd Zog, who really created this outline I list in chapter 6, developing an elite sales process. And it really changed everything for me. And once I developed a sales process, then I started seeing consistent results.
Yep. Tell us your sales process. You go into it in depth in the book, and it's a good one. I love it. And I've always been told it could be the 5 Ps, Miller Hyman, the 3 Rs. It could be DISC. It could be, if Challenger Sales has it could be anything, because many of them have similar elements, but the key is consistency.
Yes, exactly.
So talk to us about that.
Yeah. So the acronym is PAIDA, PAIDA. And so pre-call planning, approaching the customer with rapport, identify pain, demonstrate value, advance, and I add close and follow up to that, right? And so pre-call plan is the first step. So many people, are watching Netflix and different things, and they waste time in the evenings where they could spend 15, 20 minutes reading the website of their customer they're calling on, looking them up on social media. There's so much goodness you can get in pre-call planning that most salespeople, in my opinion, overlook.
Yeah.
Or they think they're good enough to wing it. And so pre-call plan is a game changer. Approaching the customer with rapport is the second step. I mean, at the end of the day, relationships, I talk about in chapter 5, are so much more important than everything else. Despite how commoditized the business is, if your customer likes you, that like leads to trust. That trust leads to them buying from you over time in consistent results. So pre-call plan, approach the customer, identify pain. If there's not pain, you're not going to sell anything.
Right.
That's just the bottom line. And so in med device, a lot of times we align with our physician partners where we showcase our technology, showcase our services, our solutions. And if it strikes a nerve, a lot of times we can use that pain to drive deals across the line and work with the administrative C-level folks within hospitals and other organizations. But sometimes our product and pricing and et cetera can work the other way as well, where we find other avenues. But you've got to find pain, because without pain, nothing will get accomplished.
That's great. And it's in detailed steps in the book as well. So you're just giving this stuff away, which I should mention. Jon Alwinson.com.
Yeah.
There are free resources there that I'm using. I just discovered them. I'm like, I need this. The weekend planner, for instance.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the weekend planner. That's a big one.
For sure. So there was a point in time when I was going for that big award I talked about. And it was in 2016 where every single weekend I would, in the morning, Saturday, I would have my workouts. I would spend time with my family, but call it 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. I was very consistent that I'm going to go carve out some time in my office and plan my next 2 weeks. And so as an individual sales contributor, that Saturday afternoon before my kids were really big, I started taking that Saturday afternoon, a couple hours in the afternoon to really get tight before the next week. And that actually has morphed now into Sunday night planning for me, where after dinner, send the kids upstairs, I'm going to go spend a couple hours in my office and just religiously as a manager, I'm thinking through my team, the needs, what do we need to accomplish this week? And so regardless of what that looks like for you, the weekend planner free download on our website is a great resource to kind of get your mindset wrapped around what's important next and come out firing on Monday. So you're not defensive when you wake up on Monday morning, but you're actually going on the offense, which is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Hitting the ground running, I think is something that I hear a lot in the pages of this book. You talk about desire, but lacking, like reps want to be winners. They want to be President's Club. They want to be Circle of Excellence. They want to go on trips. They want to win the watch. They want things, right? They want to have those emblems and success, and certainly the financial rewards. So they have a desire, but a lot of times they're lacking sacrifice and have rather ineffective daily activities. And I worked in human resources for about 6.5 years at a major corporation before I switched and went into recruiting. And I worked with the field. And it made me think of a guy that his daily activity was he would stay at home and he would call into the surgery center to see if they were planning on using his product that day. And if they were, then he'd go down there. But if they weren't, he wouldn't. He'd be at home. And that seems to me like to epitomize, maybe that's a drastic example of an ineffective daily activity, but he wanted to win and had been able to do that for years.
Right.
And it was kind of a joke with the surgery center, but they liked him. It's just when competition came along, he got his clock clean.
Yes.
Because now there's an alternative to that.
Yeah. He rolled over and had he been consistent in showing up, he could have potentially influenced cases that never would have happened had he not been down there,
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, yeah.
But you're talking about a rhythm a lot of times. That's the word that kept coming to mind when I was reading your book is a rhythm. You have the habits, you have the discipline, you have the activities. And before all that, you have the planning to know how to establish a rhythm, a cadence almost.
Yeah, putting in the older I get, the more I try to put those systems around. So each year I'm a big goal guy. So I write my goals down. I think there's power in goals. The more I learn, the more I realize that systems are really important to create for yourself. So my Sunday night planning, that's a system that has led to consistent results. It's not a fluke. And, figure out that rhythm, what systems you need to put in your life. And I think this book could be a great starting place for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
It's not the only place. There's a lot of great resources out there, but start creating those systems that will allow you to win.
Yeah. You're an author, so obviously books matter to you. What would you say are your top maybe 3 to 5 sales books that have, you touched on a couple. Little Red Book of Selling was one.
Yeah.
I heard that. What are a few others?
Yeah, I love anything Mike Weinberg writes. He actually wrote on the back of my book a review of the book. It's kind of a keystone review for me. But so anything Weinberg, so New Sales Simplified by Mike Weinberg is huge. If you're in management, I love his new book, First Time Sales Manager. There's a lot of good nuggets of truth in that. So anything Weinberg I read. Jeff Blount, I like his stuff. Anthony Iannarino, he has a couple really great books that I refer back to often. I like leadership books too. So anything John Maxwell.
Yeah, sure.
The better we can get as leaders, and I look at everybody on my team as a leader. So the more we study leadership, the more we can influence and serve our customers well, the more successful we'll be. So I think not just sales. I wouldn't just limit yourself, but if you're just getting started in the game, for sure, devour every sales book you can. Those are great starting points.
Yeah. Well, thank you also for giving me permission to like Grant Cardone's 10X rule book.
Yeah. I love the book.
Because you said he's polarizing. I will typically steal some of his most flamboyant quotes, and then I'll work them into a call with my brother when we're talking through business and tell him something from Grant Cardone and pass it off as mine, and he'll burst out laughing, and then we'll laugh about it. But there's always a nugget there, and I think he sets himself up to be laughed at a little bit intentionally, because he knows that it stays with you sometimes longer. So that was fun to see him in your book as well. As I mentioned,
he's a character.
Yeah, that's great. We're going to have to land the plane on this interview. I know I could talk to you all day, but Shovel the Rocks.
Yeah.
That's a story we got to talk about, because I have my own Shovel the Rocks story, but it's not rocks I'm shoveling. But tell us your Shovel the Rocks story.
Yeah. So Shovel the Rocks, it's one of the chapters in my book, but there was a point where I was on a 3-day field ride with one of my reps, and I came back to my driveway with 8 tons of river pebble rocks and these big mounding rocks, literally to the point where I wasn't in the best state. So I called my wife from the driveway. I'm like, I can't even pull in the driveway. And, she knew I wasn't happy. I was exhausted. And all I could think about doing was, all right, I could let this ride and get a letter from my HOA. I knew those rocks needed to be in my backyard. And ultimately what I did was I just put in my earphones and I just started getting to work. And so I started shoveling the rocks and put it in a wheelbarrow and took multiple trips from the front of my house all the way to the back of my house. And as I was shoveling these rocks, I was angry at first. I was saying things I probably shouldn't have said. But after I shook that off, I realized, man, shoveling the rocks is a lot like sales. Some of it is just not fun. Some of it just sucks, to be honest. But the adversity and toughness we need in sales is like coming home from a 3-day field ride and starting shoveling rocks.
Yeah.
And I think the great ones will get that. And then other people might take a little time, but realizing that a lot of what we do, no matter what we do, regardless of industry or wherever, it looks like hard work, right? And the great ones get it, they do it, and they put in the work, and they overcome. And I think that's my encouragement to people, regardless of where you are in the game of sales, whether you're new, seasoned, etc., put in the ear pods, bite down on the mouthpiece, and start shoveling.
Fantastic stuff, John. Thank you so much for being with us today. The book is called Relentless Sales. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at his website, as I mentioned, jonalwinson.com. The skills, mentality, and faith needed to be great in sales. John, this has been fantastic having you on. I think you're working on another book about sales management, are you not?
I am. I think the cat's out of the bag at this point. So,
any ETA on when that's coming out?
It'll be a little while, probably 2 years. But
okay.
But that's the goal, to have that out in 2 years.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, let's not wait 2 years to have you back, because I only made it through half of what I wanted to make it through with you. Will you come back to the show sometime?
Anytime, Jordan. I loved it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, John. Take care.
You too.
Thank you for joining us on the Chase MedSearch podcast. I hope that you gained some helpful insight from today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and give us a like on your favorite streaming platform. It really helps grow our audience. For more information on Chase MedSearch, visit our website at chasemedsearch.com. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, I'm Jordan Chase, and this has been the Chase MedSearch podcast.